Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar, Content in the Customer Experience. We're going to be looking at some best practices for B2B marketers, really centered around content and delivering great customer experiences. As a matter of housekeeping, we're taking questions. Definitely, as we go through, drop your questions. We definitely like to be interactive in our webinars and engage. So with that, let's get going. I'm very excited for today's webinar. I'm joined today by Christine Polovacek, Service Director, Content Strategy and Operations for Serious Decisions, and content and strategy that we leverage at Aprimo that helps up our game and guide us, give us direction. And so with that, Christine, thank you for joining us. Did you want to give the audience a little bit of information about yourself?
Sure, happy to. So thanks, Ed, so much. Hi, everyone. Again, Christine Polovacek. Nice job on the pronunciation, Ed. Very well done. I've been at Serious Decisions a little over 3.5 years now. I run this practice area for marketing executives and content leaders doing any sort of content transformation work, which I'm going to talk about more about today. Before joining Serious, I spent about 20 years in various B2B content strategy and marketing leadership types of roles, content strategy, campaigns, so on and so forth. So happy to be here.
Awesome. Thank you. I'm very happy you're here as well. Just quick intro on me, Ed Brielt, head of marketing for Aprimo. All things getting the brand out there, our product marketing, demand generation, demand creation, understanding our customers, understanding our audience, and really getting our brand narrative, our product narrative, and the creation of content out into this large ecosystem to help share our story. And with that, Christine, how about if you carry us forward?
All right, I have a lot to cover with you guys today, so I'm going to jump right in. So I think hopefully these slides will cooperate with me. Again, I'm the practice leader for the content strategy and ops function at Serious Decisions. So I talk to clients every day, B2B marketing execs and content leaders about what is and isn't working in their B2B content engines. And we have a lot of research data that confirms that very few B2B marketing organizations today have reached an advanced or optimized state, and I'll talk about that a little bit more as we go. But this is typically because we see gaps across strategy, people, process, and technology. And so today I want to share with you what I believe the foundational factors are to improving content engine performance if you do not have them in place today, which I can guarantee you you're at least missing some of them. I'll share some industry benchmarks in terms of maturity across those key areas, and then I want to introduce you to some best practices and frameworks, which is of course what we're known for at Serious, to help you get there a little bit faster. So I'd like to start with a few key stats to frame things up. And the first one is this, that 80% of respondents in our 2018 Serious Decisions Customer Experience Study said the most significant driver of their purchasing decision was direct or indirect customer experience, but customer experience either way you slice it. So the bottom line here is that customer experience drives purchasing behavior, period, the end. And if I can get this slide, I'll give you the punchline on it. Right, so that being said, it's no surprise that the #1 priority for B2B CMOs, according to our 2017 Global CMO Study, the #1 priority is enhancing the customer experience. So this slide actually shows those navy blue boxes across the top, show the top 3 strategic priorities cited by B2B CMOs in that study. And then the lighter blue boxes show the 2 key challenges that they associated with achieving those top 3 goals. And what I find interesting here and desperately want people to understand is that content in one way or another is critical to achieving all of these goals and addressing all of these challenges. So there's a content lens on all of these. Do we have organizational readiness for high performing content? Do we have content analytics capabilities in terms of the data piece? Can we develop audience-centric content that resonates with buyers and customers? Do we truly understand our buyers and customers? Do we have those insights? Are we making the right investments in terms of the content creation and promotion that we're doing? Most companies are spending hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars on content creation and promotion. So are they making smart content investments? And are those investments the right ones to generate high quality leads? So there. Oh, did that work or did you do that, Ed? So few organizations consider themselves advanced across the 4 major phases of the content lifecycle as we talk about them. So only 17% cite themselves advanced in content strategy and planning, 20%, which is the highest for content creation, but still very low. That's still only 1 in 5 organizations. 13% for content activation. When we say activation, that means the promotion or the distribution of the content to internal or external audiences. And then 10% for content ops capabilities, which honestly isn't surprising to me. That is the weakest and most nascent area in most B2B orgs today. So forwarding, there we go. So this is why when CMOs, other marketing leaders, seek our support at Serious Decisions with their digital transformation or their customer experience initiatives, that I will heavily evangelize this idea of content transformation, because it's really critical to have a well-oiled content machine. If you don't, it's extremely difficult to succeed at optimizing the customer experience, because let's face it, so much of how audiences interact with our brands is through the consumption of our content. But for so many of us, unfortunately, still, our content engines are handicapping instead of helping with those business objectives. So what you're looking at here is the Serious Decisions Content Transformation Roadmap, and it's a 3-phase model. I've grayed out for now phase 2 and phase 3, but don't worry, I will reveal those to you at the end of the presentation, so you'll get to see the whole thing. But for now, what I'm basically going to do through the rest of the presentation is walk you through these 4 dimensions you see on the left of strategy, people, process, and technology, and talk about the key milestones that you need to put in place in phase 1 to drive content transformation, which again, ultimately is a linchpin to success in overall customer experience initiatives. So let's jump in and start with the strategy piece. So in our 2018 State of B2B Content Study, we asked marketers how often their teams work from documented content strategy plans. And as you can see here, only 22% are doing that all the time, always. Another 46% are doing it often, which is great, but that still leaves nearly a third of B2B marketing orgs that are only sometimes, rarely, or never documenting their content plans. And even this is sort of displaying an overly optimistic view of what the state of content strategy maturity is in B2B orgs. So if we go to the next slide, hopefully, you'll see here when we did the study, we said, okay, that's great. You've got a documented content strategy plan, but tell us what's actually informing those documented plans. And that's really where the rubber meets the road. And you can see here, when we asked about whether these best practice inputs were informing their documented content plans, we didn't even reach a critical mass across any of these, 50% or more of orgs who cited always or often using these inputs. So there's still a lot of room for improvement here in B2B marketing orgs. And if you're weak in any of these areas, I encourage you to address those gaps, because all of these things should be incorporated into your documented plan. So let's start looking first on the next slide at the audience framework. Okay, so how do you begin to put some of these critical inputs in place? The first step is to document an agreed upon audience framework. And you'll see that on the left, right? You see like a decision tree view where you get down to the key personas that you're trying to prioritize. And there really needs to be consensus across the executive team, sales, marketing, and your product teams about what the audiences are and what the prioritization of those audiences are as well. Now, typically, portfolio marketing or product solution segment industry marketers will own the execution of this if it's not already in place. And this is really what sets the stage, as you see going through the offering map and the buyer's journey map pieces of this framework that you're looking at. It's really what sets the stage for being able to prioritize a list of personas that you then develop persona insights around. This is really where you're able to understand the needs and challenges of those personas, and that will then inform how you map offerings to those needs instead of vice versa, which is a very company-centric or product-centric approach. This model is really intended to get at how do you become audience-centric in terms of your go-to-market strategy, and then ultimately understand, once you map needs to offerings, how you then reverse engineer offerings to the buying scenarios for those personas, as well as their knowledge requirements across the buyer's journey. So let's dive a little bit more into the persona framework itself. So once you have your audience framework, you then need to develop truly deep buyer insights. And you saw that as one of the key challenges challenges that CMOs cited in terms of being able to really produce content that meets the needs of their audiences from a decision-making process perspective. So there are 4 buckets of attributes that you should be looking at when you're developing your persona insights. The first is process attributes. And the buying scenario is, how do they buy? Is it an independent purchase, a committee purchase, or a consensus purchase, or a committee purchase, like small, medium, large? How many people are involved? What's their role in the decision process or the buying scenario? Where are they involved in the decisions? What is the maturity, market maturity, or the demand type for that audience? And then what are their primary decision drivers? So for example, is it strategic, operational, financial? The functional attributes are really the things that you need to understand to be able to target these audiences effectively. So this is not only their job role, but what is that family of titles associated with that job role, so that you can effectively target through email or paid search or display or whatever tactics that you're using. The emotive attributes are really important in terms of creating highly engaging content. Do we understand their initiatives, their key challenges, what their primary needs are? And lexicon I really like to emphasize, because that's just our word for what's the vocabulary that they use to talk about their market, their role, those initiatives and challenges that we're talking about. And that's not only from if I was talking face to face to them, what is the language that they would use so that I would be able to have a conversation with them that resonates, but what are their digital behaviors in terms of that lexicon? How do they search for information on various channels and using universal search engines and things like that? Because that will inform your content strategy. And then the behavioral attributes are really, how do they prefer to consume that content? What type of asset formats are their preferences? Where do they prefer to consume that information? And what's the expected engagement level, or what is the engagement level you should expect as they engage with you throughout each of the buyer journey stages? So with that, I would like to move on and let's talk about messaging. So once you understand the personas, then you also need to develop your messaging that's going to resonate with them, right? And this needs to be a rationalized list of personas. One of the things that I often see is that organizations will have, 7 different product lines, and they all have overlapping personas. A portfolio marketing leader needs to rationalize that so they can rationalize the messaging and how they're going to go to market to target those audiences. So I don't have time to go through a whole messaging framework exercise. We have this model called the Messaging Nautilus, which is very popular for that. And I just pulled out one section of that model, which is the value prop development section, because I really do love this, this formula of, identify the audience, state who the audience is, state their need or their key challenge or pain point, assert or explain how you help solve that need, then explain explicitly using data as well what the outcome will be if they use your method for solving the problem, and then add some sort of differentiator that distinguishes you from your competitors in terms of how you help solve this. Bam, you've got basically a rough draft of a value proposition statement. So value props are really important. Having an overall messaging framework, your key themes, your key value props that then can inform content creators and content strategy decisions is really important. And a lot of times I will see that organizations will have high-level campaign themes, but they don't have a nested architecture of messaging themes and value props. So if that's something that's missing for you, it's something that you should address. It will help improve the results of your content strategy plans. All right, let's move on. I have one more slide in terms of talking about the strategy piece of this. So another important variable in this strategy equation is buyer journey mapping. So we know we can't control where or when someone enters into a buyer's journey. We also can't control what an audience wants to consume, but it's still important to do buyer journey mapping. And that's because we really need to understand our audiences through those persona insights and what their knowledge requirements are and how those are different in early, mid, and late stage interactions. That will help you craft a content strategy so that wherever and whenever they enter into an interaction with you, they will be able to find the content that meets their needs and interests. So this slide is really just depicting, our language around what the buyer's journey stages are: education, solution, selection, and as well as that sort of pre-education stage where they're either in a state of status quo, they're already a customer, or they may be with a competitor and you have to trigger them into a new education stage. But along the bottom there is basically saying, how do you position your messaging? What is the real primary intent of what you're trying to do to get them to progress through this buyer journey? Now, when we say knowledge requirements, I basically just mean, what are those frequently asked questions that they have that they will need to have answered before they're going to feel comfortable progressing on in their purchasing research process with your organization? All right, so let's sum it up. So we've just talked through these milestones that you see here in the strategy part of phase one. So the audience framework, the personas, the messaging framework, and then the content transformation roadmap is really the whole thing that we're doing right now. So I'll circle back to that again later and put a finer point on it. But for now, let's move on and talk about the people element. All right. So role clarity and alignment across the teams that contribute to the content lifecycle is really a linchpin to success. So I see interlock and alignment issues everywhere with almost every company I talk to. The content lifecycle is naturally cross-functional in nature. So there are a lot of people contributing, so interlock ends up being of primary importance. So you know, it's true for any size company, but it's really important the larger an organization gets and the more complex it is. So as you can see here, only 53% of the aggregate set of respondents in our 2018 State of B2B Content Study consider their interlock to be excellent or above average. However, when we slice that by those that claim to have advanced versus beginner content engine maturity, it's very interesting to see the stark contrast here. So organizations who said we have advanced content engine maturity also cited having either excellent or above average interlock, whereas beginner organizations, it's still pretty muddy, and you can see they still have a lot of role clarity issues. So how do you fix that if that's still a problem for you? Saying if you have role clarity and alignment challenges, we suggest conducting what we call a content model gap assessment. And this is a survey-based self-assessment that we do through our benchmarking practice, where clients can basically understand where they have gaps. So red and gray are basically bad, and red means you have wrong primary ownership assignment in terms of what we would consider to be best practice. Gray means there's either lack of clear ownership or there's lack of clear communication around ownership for that activity in the content lifecycle. Now, you don't have to be a client of ours to necessarily do this. You could just take this visual and do it more as like a brainstorming whiteboarding exercise, but I do think that it's important to really document each of the key steps and activities that are happening throughout your own content lifecycle, and whether it's really clear inside the organization who should be doing what, when, where, why, and how. So the next thing I want to bring up, the first part in this people section was interlock, right? Do we have role clarity and alignment? The second part is, do we have the right skills in place from a content perspective? So this is, again, from that CMO study, and you can see for each of the major marketing sub-functions, CMO cited what was the key area they were focusing on from an upskilling perspective in the coming 12 months. And what I want to point out is, you know, there's some clear explicit calls, shout outs to content strategy and ops is a focus, messaging and content, but really all of these things have a content related element to them. You need to have better content analytics skills. You need better content tools and technologies, better content strategy planning and alignment. Campaign strategy, your content is basically the backbone of campaign strategy. And even from a partner and a customer growth perspective, those are dependent on having really strong content chops. So the second piece of that gap assessment is this competency gap assessment, and it's really basically a red light, yellow light, green light on where you have the greatest strengths and weaknesses from a skills perspective across the content lifecycle. Now, again, you don't have to do this using our benchmark, but I do think that it's important to go through as a team and go through the exercise of asking yourselves, how well do we think we do at each of these things? And if there are critical activities or deliverables in your content engine or ecosystem that are breaking down, then you need to figure out what you're going to do to either upskill, hire, or outsource to help fill those gaps. So that can be something from very, very strategic, as in we don't have audience-centric content strategy development skills, to something more tactical that we don't have, our campaign managers don't have the right web writing skills to create high converting landing pages. So you get the general idea there. All right, let me just find this little arrow again. All right, there. All right, so now let's take a moment to look at the maturity of how organizations are structuring their content teams. So one of the key trends we see is the investment in centralized content teams or hubs. And while there may still be other content roles in different parts of the business, 61% of orgs overall had some sort of centralized content function. Another 25% have the team at the BU or the line of business level, and that does make sense in some cases, but I would advocate for more of a hub and spoke function with a corporate level content hub and the spokes or the mini content engines that live at the regional or BU level for more matrix enterprises. And yay, I'm getting this little arrow thing down. When we talk about a centralized content function at Series Decisions, we call it content strategy and ops. So this is really just our terminology for what a next gen centralized content team should look like. And again, it might not be centralized at the corporate level, maybe it's centralized at the B level. So take everything I'm saying in the perspective that it's going to work for you, but there is some level of content governance that needs to be going on. Our content ecosystems have become very complex for a lot of our client organizations, and I'm sure for a lot of you that are listening and watching right now. So these are just some of the high level responsibilities that should be the remit of a centralized content team across the content lifecycle. So if they don't explicitly own content strategy development in the upstream insight phase, they will be more of a training and enablement function to at least make sure that the marketers who are making those decisions understand how to apply the persona insights, the journey maps, and the other inputs that come from typically a portfolio marketing function would then get operationalized and embedded in planning. They are the glue between all of the different teams that touch the content lifecycle. They are sort of that air traffic control. The creation stuff is usually most legacy in terms of centralized content teams. They've been a marketing communications function or creative or content services, the in-house agency or whatever, and those responsibilities still remain. In the activation phase, they don't typically activate content like field marketers or campaign marketers or digital or demand teams, but they should be air traffic control, own a global master content calendar, drive that visibility, findability, transparency, accountability across teams. And oftentimes, if they are a centralized hub, they will own some translation and localization processes, but that one's more dependent on your org design. And then finally, in that optimization phase, these things are the ones that typically have no owner. Everybody owns it, so nobody owns it. And these are really the content operations elements that really need explicit oversight. So content or asset management, content audit and inventory, taxonomy management, rationalization of content technology, and then also those measurement insights that are really important as you're trying to maximize the ROI of your overall content investments and understand what you need to understand to then go back and inform future content strategy decisions. All right, so that's the people dimension, and I really covered the content ops, the competency mapping, and that gap assessment piece already in the previous slides. The last comment I would just make here is that from a content transformation council perspective, it will be important to establish some sort of cross-functional steering committee that can support your overall content transformation milestone goals, as well as just anything that you need to build cross-functional consensus or collaboration around from a content initiative perspective. So we have clients who will call that like their content committee or a content quality board. I've heard different names, but it is important to get that going to help facilitate that interlock that I was talking about. All right. Moving on to process. So let's start with a look in the process section around just how pervasive content process issues really are. And one of the biggest problems is that there aren't formalized processes. A lot of times organizations will, they will have their process that have sort of matured organically. You know, there's been M&As, there's been growth in the organization. They've had multiple reorgs and things have sort of just come together in a cobbled sort of way. So one of the key things is when there's no formalized process, you get things like content waste. So we see 65% of content going unused as an average across B2B orgs. I've seen this over and over again when we work on content audit and inventories with clients, that at least 50%, I've seen as much as 80% of content when they do an inventory and analysis of their content is not being actively used, hasn't been for a long time, and it's redundant, multiple versions, it's outdated, it's not relevant, whatever, and it could just get it out of there and get rid of the clutter. And because there isn't this, people don't have their content houses in order and they can't effectively track utilization or performance, they have zero ability to track content ROI. I have yet to see a client, even our most advanced clients, be able to demonstrate an accurate content ROI. And that's because they're typically lacking, for now, the processes and the technology that they need in place to do that effectively. So one of the first things to do, and I showed you the color-coded version of this content model already in those gap assessment views, but one of the first things that you really need to do is to adopt a content process framework to really drive governance. And when I say governance, I don't mean like policing, I mean more facilitating and enabling effective content processes and making sure someone in the organization actually has visibility into what's going on and not just little fragmented pieces of it, but what does the whole look like. So this is our version of a content framework that's supposed to depict the end-to-end content lifecycle and all of the key activities and processes that need to be happening within that. So you can customize something like this and make it, you know, more your own, change language so it more matches the semantics of your internal culture, but it is still really important to get everyone, especially within marketing, to use a common vocabulary and framework to talk about content process. So just at a high level, there's 4 phases to this model. Insight is like planning. I already talked through all of this basically before, but just to reiterate, because I know I'm sharing a lot with you. Creation is the production, activation is the promotion or distribution of the content, and optimization is really the management and the measurement of that content. So I won't have time to deep dive beyond that for today, but I do highly recommend that you think about formalizing a content framework as well as a content strategy and ops team, and that's really going to serve you in many ways. Another important catalyst is a content audit and inventory. And unfortunately, our benchmark data shows that only 33% of orgs have actually done a full content audit of sales content assets within the past 3 years, and it's even less, only 25% for marketing content. The good news is a lot of you are in the process of doing that or will be in the near future. So I think that people are finally kind of getting on board that this is hugely important. And the gap analysis that you will do against that inventory in terms of the tags and the attributes that you will capture and align to your assets like persona, journey stage, related offering, vertical language, etc. Those are all critical lenses that you really need to look through to understand if you're truly supporting your strategic objectives. So are you heavy in education stage content but weak in solution and selection, or vice versa? Are you heavy in product and solution level content but weak in education and thought leadership? Those are the key learnings that you're really trying to figure out when you go through this exercise that's both qualitative and quantitative. And of course, you need this from a pure asset management perspective as well. Findability is the #1 issue in terms of content utilization that we see in B2B orgs today. So this will really benefit all of your stakeholders. But that in itself isn't enough. You need a centralized content library, or at least consolidated libraries. And you can see here that only 44% of orgs overall have this today, although advanced organizations, or those that cite themselves advanced, are doing that at a much higher rate. One example of why this is so important, our research shows that on average, sales reps have to look in 6 different repositories to find the content they need to support a buyer interaction. And that's just a huge productivity time suck. And then, of course, there's one extra layer here. You've got content audit and inventory, gap analysis, and then you also need to consolidate your libraries and have a taxonomy and some metadata. Tagging and taxonomy are huge to make sure that you're addressing findability and supporting content strategy, gap analysis, and all of those sorts of things. So there's still a lot of work to be done here. As you can see, only 35% of orgs overall have or plan to have that in the next year, but advanced orgs are by far ahead of that. And I just like to emphasize anything that you need to do from a personalization, custom content recommendations, targeting, all of those things require metadata. So I can't emphasize enough how important that is. All right, did that forward? There we go. And this is just an example. We're running out of time, so I'm going to speed up a little bit here, but this is just an example of how we work through a content audit with organizations. The major takeaways here are you're probably going to have more to audit and inventory than you have the resources to support. So you're going to need to do some discovery, understand the scope of repositories in play, which ones are used more than others, or where is the most important content. Maybe that's your website, maybe that's a SharePoint site, maybe that's Box. It could be a variety of sources, but you'll need to start somewhere and scope and slowly work your way towards inventorying what you need to inventory and cleaning things up. You'll need a taxonomy framework to support that. When we inventory all of our content, what are we trying to tag it for? Again, personas, journey stages, vertical, language, etc. Then you do the gap analysis, and you can have multiple versions of X and Y axis here. I want to see what we have across journey stages for X audience, or I want to see what we have for this offering in these languages, or I want to see the format, the asset type diversity we have to support this offering. You get the idea. You'll have a lot of cleanup to do. Then you need to optimize the assets themselves as well as the repositories, and then there's ongoing maintenance that will need to be done, because I've seen a lot of clients, they'll do a content audit once and then they don't keep it up, and then in a year or two they end up right back where they started, so that's no good. Content measurement, really important. These are the 4 metrics classes that we think you need to holistically capture KPIs around in order to really understand what's happening in your ecosystem. So readiness level metrics, are we prepared to perform? Do we have all of those operational pieces in place? Activities, what are we doing? How many assets are we producing? How many are we activating? That's counts of actions taken. Output is really what a lot of people track today. How much traffic are we getting? How many downloads? How many leads? And that's, of course, really important. But then there's that next level, which is, I know for a lot of you right now, still hard. And I think a lot of that is related to your process and technology limitations, which hopefully you'll start to fix based on some of the things you're learning today. But ultimately also, how are we contributing to opportunities, pipeline, and revenue? And these are just some of the content process related metrics that we asked about in our latest study. And you can see here that pretty much the most that people can track are how much are we creating and how much did it cost for us to create it. And that's great, you should be tracking that, but a lot of these other process metrics are really important to capture as well. I hear a lot of content teams saying we're lean, and they have no data to support why they need additional resources, or there's no way to analyze the way time is being allocated. If you have multiple lines of business, are you allocating the time of the content creators in such a way that is aligned with your strategic business objectives, or is it on a first come first served basis? If you don't have these process metrics, you're not making informed decisions. And this is really where technology comes into play. And so those are the milestones for this section for process. Adopt a content model, do a content audit and inventory, and do a measurement audit. What are you able to capture for KPIs today, and what aren't you? And what do you need to do to really plan for fixing those gaps? All right, so let's wrap up with looking at technology. And I apologize that we're running a little bit behind because of my clicking issues, but here's some of the data from our Serious Decisions Command Center on content technology investment intentions by B2B orgs. And you can see there's a lot of interest in a lot of different categories. And so you see here, BI tools, content marketing, DAMs, MRM tools, SEO. I mean, it really runs the gamut right now. The really important point that I want to make, because there are all of these stated intentions around what content technology you want to invest in, is to really first prioritize the business challenges that you're trying to address as an organization. So at a very high level, you will need 5 main capabilities. Tools to support content creation. This is like your creative suites, interactive tools, video. You'll need global calendaring to drive cross-functional alignment and collaboration. Workflow automation is required to drive efficiency and scale. Asset management, you absolutely need, that's non-negotiable to improve utilization and findability, and also provide a lot of those support measurement as well. And then the analytics, which is the measurement itself, right, which will come from a variety of sources, but document a list of your content and process, document a list of your content process and performance business requirements. And then based on those gaps and issues, and that's really what should drive the rationalization of what you need. And you're gonna need a blend of probably upgrades, downgrades or consolidations, integrations, and then net new investments as well. It's usually some blend of all of those. And the reason I'm really emphasizing that is because even just looking at some of the core categories that we think need to be represented in the content engine that are listed on this slide, as well as some of those extended ones on the previous slide, like SEO and localization, for example, there's a lot of muddiness across tech categories right now. So you have content marketing vendors and MRM vendors and DM vendors, for example, who all may have calendaring capabilities, all may have asset management capabilities, all may have workflow capabilities. So you really need to identify more at a capability level what you need, and then that should drive you to a category agnostic shortlist to include in an RFP process. I don't want you to get hung up on, I'm just looking at this category. All right, so that wraps that up. And so basically here, you need to do a technology audit based on what you find through that inventorying process and looking at saying, how much do we use this? Do we have duplication of capabilities? Where are there gaps? Then from there, you should probably build out at least a 3-year tech roadmap and plot out what you think you need to prioritize, again, from that consolidation, upgrade, integration, net new investment perspective. And so that leads me to, as I promised, a final view of that content transformation roadmap. So I know I've covered a lot of ground really fast today. I hope I have not fire hosed you too much and that you got value out of this. The final call to action here is really just to build your own content transformation roadmap. And you may use exactly what I have here and take it literally. You can also just potentially use it as inspiration and use the organizing construct, sweep out what I have in here for bullets and put in your own. But I really encourage you to commit to documenting a plan. And if things change and variables change and you need to course correct or move timelines or change milestones, that's okay, but you've got to start somewhere. And as I said before, if you have a business that's really focused on customer experience and digital transformation, then you need to be focused on content transformation because it's really a backbone to the success of those types of initiatives. So thank you. I apologize that I know I went a little long there, and I'll hand it over back to you.
Hey, no, that was great. So with all that, I mean, Christine, content is hard. Like
That is.
we quite literally need, I mean, this strategic advice, this guidance, these frameworks, these concepts. And if you skip steps as marketers, you're going to just sit there asking yourself, why isn't my content working? All that investment in it. We had such a great idea. We had the cool research, but we want to skip steps, whether that's, time pressures, resource pressures. So I think, all of this that you've laid out here today really helps us. If you skip a simple step like not having your lexicon defined and asking why your content isn't resonating with the persona, you can't skip the steps is what I took away. So really strong content, really good material. For the audience, now's a great time to ask some questions in the question panel. But what I want to do now is just for a couple minutes really underscore a lot of things that Christine laid out there. Is that, why are we doing this? Let me take you back to the beginning. Customers really they're in the driver's seat. And, us as marketers, we need to connect with them, right? So emotions drive behavior, stories that we create from our brands create identity, brand identity, and transparency then drives loyalty. And, as marketers and brands, this idea of experience, we're not just competing against, our competition, right? We're literally competing against the best experience ever by the person we're trying to meet. So this idea of heightened expectations is keeping us, super busy and keeping us on our toes. And so we really need for us to win, we need to serve and retain customers looking at their micro moments, these 0 moments of truth as they've been called, or in that context of need, that timing. So going, implementing these frameworks, having this content discipline in the organization, and then having the technology allow us to be there, it's a lot of work just for that micro moment or that fraction of a second. So that's what's driving us. And, ultimately we've got to create awesome content, right? With relevance, convenience, consistency, that which generates long-term value, that's lasting and wins the hearts and minds of, our audience that we're either trying to create for the first time or keep or, or just grow generally. And Christine laid out some technologies there. We're really seeing this convergence in the market of there's various different She had a chart up there around different capabilities of content management systems and digital asset management, marketing resource management, BI, etc., product information. It's all coming together now. It's converging and it's literally erupting and creating this new idea that we're seeing, which is this convergence of the capabilities because they all have common goals. They're getting more, we want to get more value from the content. We want to support these omni-channel experiences um, and drive more efficiency across the org, bridge these content silos that Christine talked about, and really support global strategies as well. And then as it comes together, you get the benefits of shared infrastructure and connected platforms, to align marketing with the rest of the company, not just marketing in a silo, but the entirety of the enterprise needs to be pulled together. And those strategies are, where we're going next. And this idea also of atomic content or atomized content, where we're literally taking content at its lowest level, the smallest element, and reusing it across channels and, creating dynamic combinations of the content and delivering it in real time, like we see at the micro moment, which drives that conversion and creates that awesome experience. And when we look at it, we see this idea as if you put content at the center of your strategy right here, there's so much you need to do to manage this cycle. So this ideation, so that early stage ideation, what is it that we want to do? And then that moves into planning. We want to take those raw concepts, those ideas, and start making commitments. How are we going to pay for it? There's various options. Do we want freelancers? Are we going to use our discretionary marketing budget? How are we going to actually get it and manage the funding process to understand that I piece of ROI, of the content ROI model? Then we need to create it, right? So the hard work starts, all the processes, workflow, the talent pools that we, pull from, all the resources, and the various different talents that we see in marketing today to create all the different pieces of multimedia content that are out there. Then we need to distribute it. We got to get it out the channels. We've got to distribute it down to our partners. We've got to make sure that it's on brand and it gets out there and ultimately creates working content for us. Then we need to manage it. The taxonomy that in the frameworks that we find, automating some of that so now it becomes usable and it's organized and we've got the right metadata in place. Driving reuse, really getting the full potential of it. And what I like to do with my own marketing and a lot of other marketers I talk to is channel hopping, literally getting one piece of content and using that thing everywhere across all channels on different media types. And then, of course, pulling it out of market, right? Us as B2B marketers, how much do we love it whenever we see our presentations and they've got old branding or old messages and those sorts of things. We need to pull things out of market. We need to manage this life cycle. So that's really our challenge. And then if we can do that, we want to accelerate it. That's the real value proposition out there, activating some of these content strategies with the right technology. And I just want to share, in closing, when you do that, this new layer of data and analytics emerges where you can connect your ideas and your plans and your budgets with content consumption and really get to that return on investment for content and really get good content analytics. That's what's driving it. And so I want to share a couple Aprimo customers who have been down this journey, got a lot of value. Literally, Meyer Corporation has benefited from taking on this strategy, this content strategy, and implementing the technology with the creation of a single version of the truth to govern its brand, seamlessly sharing, content across the globe, easily searchable, filterable, really cool capabilities around identification of duplicates in content because there's content gluttony these days. Everybody's got the content problem. Before we said we don't have enough content. Now we got way too much. And, Meyer is solving that problem, as well as a great B2B to C example with Philips here, who lacked centralization over 3 million digital assets for 130,000 products. Philips has a tremendous amount of products, and now they've got 8,000 users accessing a centralized repository across the enterprise. They're really reducing time to market. They're simplifying the management of all that content, reducing costs, eliminating duplicative systems, these content silos that are everywhere. That if you did the proper content audit, following the serious decisions framework, all these things emerge, and then you clean those up and you centralize them, and that's what Philips did. And then you can bring in things like advanced analytics and AI, and really leverage advanced capabilities on a converged platform. So I just want to share that, and I think we've got a couple minutes here. Christine, definitely want to kind of put you in the hot seat. I looked at some of the questions that came in here. Thank you, everyone, for submitting. And the first one is perfect for you, Christine. It says, we're a very large matrix organization with a lot of centralization. Does it make sense to have a centralized content strategy and operations function in this type of organizational structure? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if this person joined a little bit late. I think I did mention it at one point earlier on when I was saying you either need a hub or a hub and spoke model. That's our recommendation anyway, because you still need, we recommend corporate global central level, you would have a centralized content hub. If you're a very matrix organization and you're more regionally led or more BU led, you may still have spokes or mini content engines or like children of that hub that live at the regional or the BU level, and that's okay, but they should still be connected to the mothership, so to speak, because you do want to have standardization globally. Otherwise, it gets very hard to do measurement or process optimization because everybody's doing it a little bit differently.
Excellent. Yeah, great response. Really good question here from Tim. Tim, I think you win the award for the most questions. This is fantastic. But I mean, you really hit on skill sets. So, Christine, are there any specific skill sets that we'll start seeing in organization to keep up with this constant rapid state of change around content?
Well, that's a loaded question. There's so many different. Look at that content model. It's so cross-functional in nature. You've typically got portfolio marketers and campaign and demand center folks, digital folks, corp comm, sales, ops. I mean, there's so many different functions. So the reality is when you talk about skills, it really encompasses the whole marketing organization. I would say generally as a whole, most marketing organizations today have some level of skill gaps. I mean, it's just the fact of the matter of how quickly digital disruption sort of took over, that everyone needs to look at where do we need to upskill, where is it really not going to be realistic to upskill, and we instead need to either hire or outsource to address that skill issue. But again, going back to that competency gap assessment, I think doing something like that, when we do that with client orgs, it's a survey-based self-assessment. The entire marketing org takes it, and we ask you to rate on a scale of 1 to 5, what you think you're, as an overall marketing org, how good you think you are at that activity. So we think we're a 3 at content strategy. We think we're a 4 at messaging, whatever the case may be. So that's sort of where I start narrowing in on where we need to focus. But from a pure content perspective, content ops is the biggest missing link right now in orgs. They do strategy to a certain degree well. Content creation is usually pretty strong, although there's usually issues in terms of how comfortable people are with short versus long form content and being able to really pivot between different types of copywriting or interactive content development, that sort of thing. Promotion is a whole nother beast I won't have time to get into today. But again, that ops piece, if I had anywhere to focus, I would say, please, please, please fill those gaps.
Right, absolutely. More questions here. I think we have time for 1 or 2 more. And great question here on persona insights. And this takes us back to, like, in your framework, the lexicon, like skipping steps, like I mentioned. But and I have this question too. How does one actually go about getting persona insights? Do we manage it internally? Do we outsource? How do other organizations approach this? I mean, what do you recommend in terms of what we own versus what we outsource? And sometimes we kind of need to have a outside in look. What's your recommendations, Christine?
Yeah, I mean, usually what we suggest in terms of persona insights is that it's usually a blend of customer interviews, interviews with your sales organization, social media and social listening analytics, as well as SEO keyword research. So that's usually the starting point, is a blend of those things. And then leveraging third-party market research, as well as, data from studies from analyst firms. I mean, we share persona insight information, at least our portfolio marketing service does, with clients all the time. So it's some blend of those things. In terms of insourcing or outsourcing, it really just depends whether you have the resources internally to do that. I mean, we have things like persona interview guides and persona development project management templates and things like that. But if you don't have a really strong portfolio or product function who can lead that charge, then you just have to really be honest with yourselves. Do we have the ability to do this in-house? If not, there are persona development service providers that are out there that you can certainly search for and leverage as a resource. And I have one client, for example, who used an agency out of Boston to do a lot of customer interviews for them, and they actually like anonymized a bunch of their content and then asked them, what of this content as an IT leader is most useful to you, and what would you use at what parts of your buyer's journey? And that was really valuable information for them. And then they applied that to their content strategy and development decisions going forward, and their campaign KPIs are literally up and to the right, every single one, since they've gone through that exercise. Because everything now is audience centric. It's what their audience wants, not what they want to say to their audience.
Exactly. We did that as well. It is game changing. Now you know who you're speaking to, the words they use, and that idea of, I dropped it in there too, atomic content strategy. You literally pull the content together in order to speak in a language that your target can understand at least.
Yep.
Awesome investment. And then last question here. We do have a diversity of different companies who dialed in here, but obviously they're not all super large enterprise. But the question here is, the content model looks like something that is needed for large organizations with a lot of complexity. Do we need to do all these content transformation milestones and adopt a content framework as a smaller company as well, or is it overkill? Basically, can we skip steps if we're smaller?
So I think the content model is revenue band agnostic. And that if you really examine that model, all of those key activities are things that you should be doing or understanding as part of your overall content process. So I do think that even for smaller companies, they need to adopt some sort of content framework, because that will inform work. You still need workflow automation. You still need a RACI to understand who's doing what, when, where, why, how. But what will change is how fast you can drive that transformation and that clarity. Because when I work with smaller orgs, that's why on that content transformation roadmap, when you saw the duration for each of those phases, it says 3 to 12 months. That 3 months is more realistic for a small company. The 12 months is more reflective of an enterprise where things get really matrixed, really complicated. There's a lot of cooks in the kitchen, and it just takes longer to move things. I used to say, because I've worked for startups and I've worked mid-market and I've worked for very large enterprises, and it's interesting to me, even in my personal experience, when I would be in the large enterprises, I was like, you can't turn a glacier on a dime, where it just takes longer to affect change than in a smaller org. But you absolutely need to still adopt a content model or a content framework.
Excellent. Well, very good, Christine. That was fantastic, and a lot learned here today. And want to thank everybody for dialing in. And content is not easy, that's clear. But with Serious Decisions, their framework, and all the information that Christine shared today, at least we have guidance. Well, thank you, Christine.
Thank you. It's my pleasure.
Absolutely. And signing off. Cheers, and have a great day.